Um, Good afternoon. This is the American Percussion Seminar. I'm Mark Ford, so honored to host this event. And today is going to be a special day because Gary Burton is going to be with us and speaking with our participants at the seminar and talking about his career in music. Gary's always been such an inspiration and motivation for me. And my wife realized today on Facebook, kind of gave her a reminder that the last time, Gary, I had the opportunity to hear you play live was in Sydney, Australia, and it was today in 2014. Can you believe that?
Okay.
And it was such a surreal situation because I was there in Australia doing some, concerts and clinics and things, and I see Gary and Chick Corea are going to play at the Sydney Opera
At
House.
the Opera House,
And
yeah.
we got fortunate to have tickets on the fourth row or something. And then Gary and I had a chance to talk a little bit afterwards, which was nice. And then got to meet Chick, which was really, really awesome as well. One more thing too is that Gary was a guest with us with UNT's 10 Questions Plus, maybe 3 or 4 months ago. Well, I guess it was in the fall, wasn't it? Yeah, it was in September. But the what an incredible session that was as well. So anyway, if everybody could give a virtual welcome to Gary Burton. So wonderful to have you here.
I
Gary, do you want to start with the questions or you just want to talk a little bit up?
Yeah, because actually all the kinds of things I would think to maybe pass on to students are well represented in this list. So by the time I reviewed it, I thought, wow, this is really, a pretty broad range of things that I, often talk about when I'm teaching. So why not? And then do people ask questions?
Yeah, let's do that same yeah, let's do the same thing. That would be great. We'll start off with Thomas Snedeker. Tom?
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, good to be here. So I was wondering, what is your approach to comping while you're soloing at the same time? And then sort of in the same vein, your approach just to building a full jazz solo.
Right. Well, here's the insight into comping on the vibraphone. It's more like the way guitar players comp. And in fact, my role model for comping when I was starting to do this was Jim Hall, the guitar player. I discovered that most guitar players, when they comp chords, only use the top 4 strings. So it's just 4 voices in the voicings. And I said, hey, I can do that. So that works for me. And then they also, when they are the only comping instrument and they're soloing and they have to comp for themselves, they switch back and forth between melody and comping. And I said, okay, I need to do that as well. But the secret with the vibraphone is that you can't divide it up into 2 hands the way the piano does. The pianist does 99% of the comping in the left hand and 99% of the soloing in the right hand. But the vibist cannot play an entire solo with 1 hand and cannot play chords with 1 hand. So what happens is you switch back and forth between hitting chords and playing melody phrases. And whenever I need to hit a chord, my solo hand comes down and joins it to make a decent voicing. And then whenever I'm playing a melody that's got 6 or 8 or 10 notes in it, my left hand, my comping hand, comes up and helps play that melody. So in a way, it's like the old jugglers who kept plates spinning in the air. I've got a comping roll going down here, and I've got a melody roll going on up here, and I have to keep helping each one out to keep it spinning. This is a way to look at it. Okay, do you play piano also?
A little bit. My mom was a piano teacher, but I didn't stick with it long enough.
Okay, well, I ended up being a piano major at college because they didn't have a vibraphone teacher in this early days of Berkeley. They didn't even have a guitar teacher. There was only like 100 more or less students in the school when I was there in 1960. So the school was pretty new, just getting started. So they said, well, you have to pick an instrument, for a major that we have a teacher for, so you can take your private lessons. So I said, well, I guess piano then would be the next choice. And it ended up being, a wonderful piece of good fortune because it helped me learn a lot of new music and also think pianistically. And that made this transfer to playing with four mallets and comping for myself and so on, you know, a more natural experience. So I always look back on it as being a piece of good luck. And I will tell you that although I still play the piano a bit to this day, that I was at the peak of my piano powers when I left Berkeley as a student. And it's been downhill since then because I don't have time to practice and stuff. All right, the second question you asked was approach to building a solo. There's two choices, essentially two categories of approaches. It seems maybe there's more, but I always feel like it's just two. One is to just string together familiar sounding jazz phrases, one after another. No real connection between them, but they both sound hip, they both sound familiar, cliche phrases almost. And I can name, I won't, but I could name at least a half a dozen famous jazz musicians who that's how they solo. Essentially, you know, unconnected, but nice sounding phrases. Clark Terry, the trumpet player. To a great extent, Oscar Peterson, the piano player. The other approach is you try to make your solo have continuity. And I like to think of it as telling a story, and that each phrase I play continues the story. I want the listeners to get caught up in what I'm developing and follow me and wonder what I'm going to do next and where is it going. And if I can keep the thread going through the whole three choruses of the song or whatever, how long my solo is, then I consider that a success. And over the years, I got to the point where I could do this pretty consistently. But by then I was 40 years old. In the early days, it was a goal. And some songs, some solos, I would manage it. Other times, you know, I couldn't seem to keep the thread going and would end up playing, you know, like 3 or 4 short solos in the course of my solo space because, you know, I'd lose the thread of the storyline. But over time, I got pretty consistent at being able to solo that way. And all my favorite soloists play that way, from Bill Evans to Miles Davis to whoever were my influences when I was growing up. It was Sonny Rollins. It was the players who could really work that theme and tell that story and make me on the edge of my seat waiting to see where they were going to take it next. Okay, so that's that question. Thank you for asking, Thomas.
Thanks so much.
Who's
Okay,
next?
it's going to be Jacob Fullenwalder, and Jacob's a student at UNT.
Oh, hey, how are you? Were you there the last time I did this?
Yes, I was. Yes.
Okay, well, you're a pro now. Okay, what's your question?
My question for you is, what are your favorite musicians, not including vibes or
Oh, yeah.
big influence from or listen to, and why?
Okay, well, you ruled out vibes and piano, and I'll say that I never really had any major vibraphone influences. I listened to Milt Jackson, Lionel Hampton, and Red Norvo, and so on back in my youth, but I had no urge to emulate them, to copy them, and so I didn't listen to them much. But piano players, definitely. But and in terms of personal listening these days, I'm a huge classical music listener, and particularly classical piano players like younger ones, Kirill Gerstein, Alexander Maleviv, older ones who are dead now, Michelangeli and Glenn Gould. In jazz, my big influences were Miles Davis, Sonny Rollins, Bill Evans. So I'll name those 3. And they shared a similar thing with what they did melodically, as I was talking about to Thomas. I knew that that's how I wanted my playing to present. And kept working for that as a goal. I love the fact that Miles could play very sparsely, and you would wait. He would play 4 or 5 notes and then leave 3 measures space. And you would be on the edge of your chair waiting to see what's he going to do next. It takes a lot of nerve to not play, to just stand there and hold your instrument and leave a big space. We tend to have an urge to keep filling in. It's like you're in a conversation and somebody says something to you and you pause because you can't think of an answer, and there's a big kind of awkward space that happens. Well, if you aren't really confident about leaving that space in your solo, you can't do it. I got to keep playing. As long as I'm a moving target, I'll be okay. And Miles used to play these wonderful simple phrases and leave spaces, and I just said, God, he makes. And then when he would play the next phrase, it would just zing because you were all prepared for it and all. So by comparison, Sonny Rollins played more continually, but he was an amazing theme developer. He would start a solo with a 4 or 5 note phrase and then work it for 10 choruses and never lose the thread. It just knocked me out. And here's a little bit of my philosophy. I made this note. To become a really successful jazz musician, you can do it either as from introducing some new techniques on your instrument, which then become, followed by other players, or you can introduce a new style of playing, of melodic, interpretation of the music that has not been done before. Or you can do both. And if you look at most of the major, real major names in the jazz world, from Miles to whoever, they would fill both of those categories. So a lot of times students will sometimes ask me, well, how do I get an original sound? How do I get my own identity? And I have to say, I've never figured that out. I think you either have it or find it, or you don't. But there's a lot of wonderful players who sound very excellent, but they don't sound different or fresh or original. And sometimes it's a burden versus a blessing. All through school and at Berkeley, I was constantly told that I was playing the vibraphone wrong. They said, no, 4 mallets will never swing, will never work. Forget it. And also, you need to play more like Milt Jackson. That's how the vibes are supposed to be played. Now, I got that from the drum teacher at Berkeley. I got it from other players. No one seemed to appreciate the new ground I was pursuing, but I didn't seem to have a choice. That was how I heard the music. And then eventually, of course, it was to my advantage because I stood out from the other players. But at first, it's not necessarily, the easiest thing to be an original. Okay, that's probably more of an answer than I started out to do.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
That was great, Gary. Kind of to tag on to Jacob's question, earlier this year in February, we've unfortunately lost Chick Corea, and your longtime friend and comrade, and you traveled the world with him. I mean, really changing the way we thought about jazz and the vibraphone, and of course with Chick's piano playing. And do you want to speak a little bit about Chick? I mean, I feel like that's important.
Well, we played together for 45 years. We never skipped a year during all that time. And up to that point, very little had been done in the way of duets in jazz. You could point to maybe 2 or 3 records. Jim Hall and Bill Evans made one in 1960, more or less, Undercurrent. But it was not a common situation, and you never saw it in live performance. And that's what we ended up, discovering when we played together, that how well our duet setting worked for us, and we kept on doing it for decades. Chick, I would say, I had influences when I was starting out that helped me find my own styles and approach to playing. But in terms of influence on me, once I was an established player, Chick very much was my, biggest influence, because we played together regularly and he was always writing new music for us. And we would, plow into new directions and new challenges regularly. And so for me, that was one of the ways I kept moving artistically and didn't get stuck playing the same, repertoire over and over. And I owed a lot to Chick, I always felt, about that. The other thing I'll say about Chick was that when we played together, the rapport was something else. You have some level of rapport with anybody you play with. The first time you jam a couple of tunes with someone, and you don't really know each other's playing that well. But if you're kind of on similar wavelength, you'll feel like, well, yeah, we reached a level 3 or 4 in rapport just in this first meeting, and so on. And other players you may really hit it off pretty well with, and you could say, well, rating on a scale of 10, that was an 8. We really, synced quite well with our playing as we did it. With Chick, immediately, it was, just off the chart. We made our first record in '72, and we hadn't rehearsed the music yet. We each brought tunes to the session, and we're going to work it out. And then, so the plan was we would rehearse the new tune for half an hour, come up with a little arrangement, and then we would tell them, okay, turn the machine on and we'll start doing takes. We ended up recording every song on Crystal Silence, that first record, in one take, except for Senior Mouse, which was 2 takes. And we had booked 3 days in the studio to make this record. We were finished in about 3 hours, and sat around listening to the playbacks for a while and confirmed it. Yeah, gosh, it's done. Sounds great. So we changed our plane tickets. This was in Norway, where we had gone to the studio to record. And so we changed our plane tickets and flew home. And even then, I didn't realize the significance of the record. When it came out, I didn't expect it to get much notice. After all, it was not exactly familiar jazz situation with, just a duet, no rhythm section. And it was on a little German label that didn't even have US distribution at the time. So it was a big surprise when, in fact, it was quickly popular, and we started getting calls to play concerts. And even that was a funny story. The first offer came from the University of Michigan. And we both were available. We had the same agent at the time, and we said, well, we're both available that weekend. Why not? And Pat Metheny was in my band at the time, and he said, okay, your guys' record is my favorite thing these days. I'm going with you because this may be the only chance I'll get to see you play in person together. So he came along and helped me carry the vibe cases and stuff. And we got to the hall, and it was huge, 4,000 seats. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be, an embarrassment. There's going to be 200 people scattered through this hall, and with us kind of up on stage. Just before concert time, I looked around the curtain, and it was full, which scared me on another level, which was how the two of us going to hold this audience with our intimate music, and they're this giant crowd. But you know, it was a huge success, and we went on from there, toured every year, and big audiences, sometimes as many as 15, 20,000 people. And it always amazed me that, you know, this little intimate combo of piano and vibes could get everyone's attention. And, you know, it was a lot of it was definitely Chick's music, Chick's playing ability. We both seemed to play at more than our best whenever we were together. So it was kind of a magical thing. That's what kept bringing us back to it, I'm sure, year after year. Okay, that's enough about Chick, I guess.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Gary. Thank
Sure.
you so much. Our next question is coming from Tomek Herish. And Tomek is in Poland. He's a student in Katowice, and he's a very gifted vibraphonist. Tomek?
I'm looking for this question.
Should be like the third one down.
Oh, I got
there.
it. Yes, got it.
Yes. Hello. I'm so happy I could meet you even through Zoom. So my question is, you brought vibraphone to just another level. What is, in your opinion, something that we could do to further develop that instrument?
Well, instruments have a history. And I came along at the time in the vibraphone history when it was quite new. I mean, the vibraphone was 20 years old when I started playing it. Which shows you how old I am, for one thing. But the point is, there was a lot of room to pioneer new ways to play the vibraphone. You know, four-mallets had been attempted, but not really developed by some early players, Red Norvo particularly, and George Hamilton Green. But there was a lot of new things that were possible technically on the instrument that I was lucky. I got to be the one who introduced these things, and it, you know, made me look like a real genius. But it was going to inevitably happen, you know, as players took up the instrument. As it became more popular and more widely available and so on. In fact, if you look at an example of an instrument that's been around for 200, 250 years, would be the piano. At this point, there are no new techniques to be discovered on the piano. Pretty much how to play the piano is an established thing. You can make up new music and new interpretations and all that, but in terms of new technique, not so much, if anything. And the vibraphone, I feel like, has come a long way in terms of its technical possibilities. The only area that still remains kind of a field of exploration is when you electrify it and use it as a trigger for electronic synthesized sounds. But in terms of the acoustic instrument itself, you know, I don't see people starting to play with 5 and 6 mallets effectively, although I could be surprised somebody might actually become a wizard at that and show us all how to do it, but it never seemed practical to me. But then again, people were telling me 4 mallets wasn't practical, and then I proved that it was. So I think the future for vibraphone players is going to be more what you play on the instrument than new ways, you know, mechanically or physically to play it. And I'll give 3 names of young players that I think are the ones I'm watching most closely. These are all players in their 20s, early 20s, mid 20s at this point. One is from France. His name is Simon Millier. He lives in New York now. Another one is from Slovenia. His name is Vid Jamnik, and he lives in New York now. And then there's Lewis Wright, who lives in London. Now, there may be some more that I'm unaware of, but those three I've come across and gotten to know personally, and fairly well experienced with their talents and their playing, and they're all kind of doing new things on the new musically, how to use the vibraphone. And I love the fact that they're original. One of my disappointments for years was watching new vibraphone players come along, and it seemed like everyone either sounded like Milt Jackson or they sounded like me. And I kept thinking, well, where's the future here? When's somebody gonna, come up with some other ways to use the instrument? And it seems to be happening now. So I'm very, very happy about that. Okay, I hope that's enough of an answer to your question.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Our next question is from a high school student, senior. Her name is Rose Brown, and she's from Texas.
Yeah. Where's Rose? I'm looking at the pictures. I'm not seeing anybody. Are you there, Rose?
We'll move on. We'll move on if she's not here. But I saw her come in early, but maybe she had a connection issue.
Okay.
Yeah. The next one is Sophia Lowe, who's going to be a DMA candidate actually at North Texas this fall. Gary? Sophia?
Hi, it's a pleasure to speak
Hi.
with you. I'm Sophia. In your interview with Tom Wilmoth in the Jazz Times, you mentioned the careful balance of mental and physical practice. So I was just curious if you could take us through your practice session. And the second part of my question is, I know that you go on tour a lot and you play so many tunes. How do you plan for an effective session?
A practice session, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the only period of my career where I practiced regularly was when I was a student at Berkeley, because I had a piano lesson every week that I had to prepare pieces for. And I had rehearsals with the school ensembles that I had to learn new music and prepare for, and so on. Once I started working, I was playing every night practically in clubs or concert halls, and I didn't have access to my instrument. And the first year, I still remember it. The first year I was 19 years old, and I started touring with George Shearing, the piano player, and his band. I was on the road 312 days that year. And I went from that group the next year to touring with Stan Getz, and we played often 7 days a week. We would play 6 nights in a club, and then on the 7th night, a day off, we would do a concert. So my practice essentially became my playing on the gigs was where my skills continued to grow and develop and evolve and so on. And the only times I practiced was when I had to learn new pieces. And so during periods where I was preparing material for a new record, for instance, I would finally find some free time, and maybe it was just afternoons in the club when it was closed, playing on the piano to write songs for the next record project or whatever. But I never did develop regular practice habits. Now, if you're a classical musician, you do a lot of practicing because you're expected to play an exact set of notes every time you perform. But if you're a jazz musician, it's the opposite. You're expected not to play the same notes every time. You're expected to create new patterns and new melodies and new structures and new solos every time you play. So regimented practice of repeating things over and over again works against you if you're an improviser. And so in general, I feel that exercise practice is probably the least helpful. That, playing kind of repetitive figures over and over again that aren't really music. They're just sort of physical exercises that, and books exist for every instrument. With mallets, it used to be the Goldenberg book back in my day. I don't know if that's still around or not. Mo Goldenberg was the player in the New York Philharmonic. And his book was kind of the Bible for percussion mallet students. I look back and a good example is Bach, when he wanted to teach his sons to play keyboards, he wrote the Inventions. Wow, what pieces of music. We still play them to this day for their beauty. We don't even think about them being, technique builders, but that was the purpose of them. It's like Liszt's and Chopin's etudes. They were training exercises, but they're so musical that that they stand, on their own feet as performance pieces, as well as technique builders. So I recommend to jazz students, frankly, the best practice you can have is to keep learning new songs and playing them on your instrument. Every new song is new information, new patterns, new phrases, new, melody strung together, new harmony progressions to learn from, and you develop your overall musical ability along with your facility on the instrument. And I'll say one more thing about the mallet instruments, which is they don't require a lot of specialized technical skill, like the violin or the oboe or the flute or the clarinet or trumpet or whatever. Where if you don't have the correct embouchure, you're probably not going to become a major trumpet player. And if you don't use the correct fingerings on the violin, you're probably not going to ever be a concert violinist. With the mallet instruments, the notes are all kind of laid out in front of you and you hit it with a stick. I mean, it's kind of a simple thing. It's immediately has a professional sounding tone, because we don't have to spend 2 or 3 years getting a sound out of our saxophone like the saxophone player does. We can play music quickly, learn music quickly on the mallet instruments, because the instrument itself already sounds good and is, easy to explain. We don't have complicated fingering systems like the woodwinds and so on. So I'm living proof that if you're going to have to mostly teach yourself how to play the vibraphone or the marimba, then the mallet instruments are the ones to choose, because I always say probably they're the easiest instruments to learn to play of all the categories of instruments. And they're a challenge to carry around, but they're easy to learn. Okay, next question.
Awesome. Okay, Gary.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Alexander Gonzalez. Alexander?
Hi there. Give me 1 second. I'm just pulling it up right now. Sorry. So my question was, I guess, what's your favorite genre of music to listen to? Do you ever find yourself taking elements from other styles of music and incorporating them into your performances? And then who is your favorite artist outside of music?
Okay, that was an interesting question when I saw it. These days, since I retired from active performing, I've become much more of a follower of classical music. It was something I never had much time for over the years of working as a jazz musician, and always felt I was lacking in my knowledge of the classical music world. And it's huge, of course. There's like hundreds of years worth of great music waiting to be explored and discovered. And so I have to say that these days, when I do feel like listening to music, and inevitably it's and it's not the most current modern music either. It's the classics, from the 18th and 19th centuries primarily. So I do listen to jazz occasionally. I tend toward listening to historic jazz, either very early jazz, which again, I'm not that familiar with already, and maybe jazz from the 50s and 60s. There's something about the music you were close to when you came of age as a musician that stays with you as kind of a favorite, kind of music, favorite genre. So for me, I learned to play in the 50s and 60s, and it was the bands who I keep naming, like Miles Davis, Sonny Rollins, et cetera, that were the major players in those eras that I still get a real, nostalgic thing from whenever I hear some of their music. I'm less likely to put on the most current, more modern players. Sometimes I'll end up listening to records that are by my close friends, musicians I used to work with, and I feel like I, feel close to, but mostly it's classical. And in terms of favorite artist outside of music, well, it's actors. I mean, in terms of performance, there's dance, there's music, and there's acting. I don't know what else there is in terms of performance art, but I've always been fascinated by both actors in plays and in movies. Particularly the ones who seem superhuman when, in their ability to capture characters and make themselves into totally, different characters from project to project, like Meryl Streep, for instance, Daniel Day-Lewis, Timothy Chalamet, for a younger one, for instance. So I always jump at the chance to see anything new from those kinds of performers. Okay, that's my answers to those questions.
Thank you.
Who's next?
We're going to skip over actually the next one, Gary, because she's asked to be closer to the end.
Okay.
We're going to go to Hannah Vanderbilt. Hannah?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my question was, how do you approach different styles when you're like playing and your grooves and stuff? Do you change up like your soloing and your technique to get unique sounds for each thing that you play?
Yeah, well, each kind of time feel, let's call it, has unique characteristics, whether it's swing or straight eighth music, tango, which I played quite a bit, very powerful rhythmic beat, and it's a lot of drama, exaggerated drama in tango music. Bossa Nova, by contrast, is also a straight eighth feel of music, but it's very melodic and lyrical and floating and soft and easygoing. Then there's ballads, which are a whole category unto themselves. That is a change of groove, so to speak. So even when I'm introduced to a groove that I'm not real familiar with, like say it's a piece in 5/4 time, or something fairly unusual, I try to let it lead me into how to feel it, how to interpret it, how to make my playing feel like it fits and feels comfortable. But certainly you can't play the same way on a tune that's got syncopated swing time, which is basically triplet feel that's creates the syncopation, but you can't play the same way on that kind of a tune as you do on a straight eighth, Latin type of tune, for instance. So I often say to the musicians that I work with, when we're working on something new, take your time, let the song tell you what it's about, and let the song tell you how it's best played. my approach to a new song, usually if someone sends me a piece of music, is I sit down at the piano and I just read it through as simple as possible, just the bare melody and the harmonies. And I repeat and I repeat again, and I listen and I get a sense for what tempo I feel it fits this song, and what groove, what time feel fits it. And whether there's anything in it I want to change a little bit here and there to make it feel more comfortable for me. But I want the song to, be my guide. Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And next will be Michael Dolis.
Let me find that. Yes,
Hello.
got it.
So I was wondering if there's anything that got you into music, or a certain kind of piece that got you into music at a younger age, or like some formative.
What got me into music at a younger age was the fact, it was nothing to do with influence. It was that my parents, who grew up during the Depression, had never had the money to take music lessons. And one of their goals was that all three of us children would get to take music lessons. And my older sister started on piano. And when I was 6, I took to hanging around the piano while she practiced and annoying her and giving her, advice and telling her when she hit a wrong note and so on. And then one day my father noticed I was in the kitchen and my sister was practicing, and I yelled out, "No, that's supposed to be an E flat." And at that point, he said he decided it was time for me to start music lessons, and discovered I had perfect pitch, which, as happens with people, a lot of people, musicians who get older, I eventually lost it about 10 years ago. Suddenly, I couldn't identify the pitches anymore, and this is something I'd had all my life. Every note sounded unique to me. I knew when it was an E flat or a C or whatever, and then all of a sudden I didn't. It was kind of disorienting at first, but there happened to be a teacher in the town in Indiana where I was growing up, who taught vibraphone and marimba. And so they took me to study with her because they didn't think it was appropriate that I should also take piano lessons and then fight with my sister over playing the piano in the house. So I took lessons for 2 years, and then we moved to a little farm town at the other end of the state, and that was the end of the lessons. But I had gotten started, and it was fun. It was easy for me. And my father just kept buying sheet music from a store in Chicago by mail. And every time he'd hear a song on the radio that he liked, he would order the sheet music and bring it home and have me learn it. I never thought of becoming a musician. Even when I discovered jazz at about age 13, I got all enthused about jazz, and this is what I wanted to play. Up to that point, my brother and sister and I and my father kind of had a family band. We would, play standard popular songs together, but it was, we weren't serious musicians or anything. But then I got into jazz, tracking down records as best I could from a little farm town in the 1950s, which wasn't easy. And I decided in my junior year of high school that instead of going to medical school, which had been my plan, I came home from jazz band camp. The very first jazz band camp happened to be in Indiana, at Indiana University. That's in the summer of 1958. And I went to it, and it was just amazing. The idea of being around 100 other kids playing jazz and all these teachers and everything, I was in heaven. So I came home and announced to my parents that I decided to switch directions. I was going to be a jazz musician instead of a doctor. And amazingly, they didn't flinch. They went along with that. And so after I finished high school, I was, started working, and I also, made my way to Boston to go to school. But I didn't really, get into music because of some single experience that, said, wow, I got to do this. It just was something I grew up with and kept going with.
Wonderful, thank you.
Did your siblings have perfect pitch too, Gary?
No, and they didn't continue with music either. My brother played bass, and my sister played trombone and piano. And we had this little Burton family band. We played 50, 60, 70 gigs a year at churches and, Lions Club dinners and factory parties and that sort of thing, all around Southern Indiana, Kentucky, and Illinois. So in fact, I sort of jokingly once said that, I started gigging when I was 10. And the only thing that's changed, I was doing 80, 100 gigs a year. And the only thing that changed was the music. The schedule was the same. So.
Wow. Do you have a memory of when your family came to hear you play once you realized you had, made a voice in the jazz world?
Oh, yeah. Because the thing is, I was very lucky in the sense that I played an instrument that was fairly rare. So there weren't a lot of openings for vibraphone players, but if there was one, I had a chance to get it. So even at 17, I was already had a record contract with RCA Victor. And when I left Berkeley at 19, I immediately got a job playing George Shearing's band because he used vibraphone players. And so almost immediately I went from, becoming a student growing up, coming of age, to being a professional in touring with name bands. I think one of the things that parents suffer through worrying about, will their son or daughter become, make a go of this career, is that it often takes, years before you reach the level of self-sufficiency and recognition and so on. And it happened so suddenly for me that there wasn't really time for them or me to, have a crisis of confidence that this seemed to be working out. If anything, it was like coming at me almost quicker than I was ready to handle. So looking back on it, that was, a big piece of good luck for me.
Yeah, a blessing. Wonderful. All right. Next question is from Jesse Gould.
Hello.
Hi.
My question is, do you have any tips for accompanying yourself on vibes when playing solo or just playing a harmonic accompaniment in general? This was, I guess it's kind of similar to Thomas's question from earlier.
Right. And the answer is pretty much the same, although we didn't talk about comping for another, for another instrument, which is more like I said that my big influence for comping when I was, say, in Stan Getz's band, and I was the one chord instrument in his group. It was, I was inspired by Jim Hall's approach to comping, fairly minimal. And he, like I said, and I realized he had a lot of variety of voicing shapes, even though he was just playing 4-note chords. So I said, well, I can do this. So the important thing is don't waste a mallet on a note that doesn't add much to the voicing. The two strongest notes in every harmony are the 3rd and the 7th. And if you're going to add another note, the 9th is the next choice, whether it's the natural 9, the sharp 9, or the flat 9. And then the 13th, the 6th as well. So I almost never play the root or the 5th. The root is so strong that it's there by implication. Even if you don't play it, everyone hears it. And someone else in the band will be playing it. And even if I'm playing alone, I can leave out the root and it's implied. The fifth doesn't contribute much at all. So, you know, I'm not reaching for it unless it's part of the melody and so on. So I learned to, you know, make the voicings count. Also, you're really not limited to just 4 notes. You can arpeggiate a bit and make it 5 or 6 even, you know, hit 4 and add a note on the next beat and let them ring. And now you've got a 5-note, you know, voicing. And in fact, piano players do this a lot. They don't just play only block chords. They play partial chords and add notes to them, and so on, and little melodic passing notes and so on. I tried to do that in my comping as well. There is some advice about comping, which I'll give, which is it's a mental trick. I guess it's not a trick, but it's a mental thing. When we're normally playing, we're giving most of our attention to our playing. After all, we don't want to make mistakes and embarrass ourselves. So we pay attention primarily to, are we playing right notes? Are we in the right place? You know, am I doing okay? And so on. But when you accompany someone, that works against you being a good accompanist. Instead, you need to step back from your playing and put your attention on the soloist. Listen to that soloist as if, you know, you're just listening and not playing along at the same time. And it's not a natural instinct. You'll notice if you consciously remind yourself as you start comping behind somebody that, okay, I got to stay focused on the trumpet player here. And then soon as it shifts and you know, we get to the bridge and you're back to watching your own comping again. And then you suddenly realize I've gone through 2 more choruses and not been listening to the trumpet player. I used to see this happen when I had ensembles at Berkeley, and I could tell quickly when the accompanying, the harmony player, the guitar player, the piano player, whatever, was not listening to the soloist. And I would stop and I would say to the pianist, okay, tell me about the trumpet solo. What do you remember? What did he do? And he'll say, you know, I don't know. I was watching my comping. I said, okay, well, I mean, did you notice the mistake he made in the second 8, the wrong note? No. How about the interesting chromatic thing he did on the bridge? Did you catch that? No, not really. So, you know, if you're listening to the soloist, you will hear what they are playing, and your comping will, you know, react to it and join them. If you're listening intently to the solo you're accompanying, you'll never get in the way of the soloist. On the other hand, if you're not paying attention, you're probably going to get in the way often. So, and this is something that most band directors never tell the piano player in the band or the guitar player, because often the band leader is not doesn't play a comping instrument. So he or she doesn't know, you know, how comping works. So they just say, well, play the chords. That's the only advice they can give. But I can tell you many times I've had to stop and explain this to somebody, you're missing how it's supposed to work. You're not listening to me or to the other soloist, and you need to shift your powers of thinking. And you'll quickly get in the habit of shifting your attention whenever you're accompanying versus you're soloing. But that's my big advice when it comes to comping. As for comping while you're accompanying yourself, it's like I explained to Thomas before. Each hand helps the other to be a comper and be a soloist, and you keep both roles going. And at the same time, if you're playing unaccompanied, you also have to, keep the time feel going. And so, there's a lot of things to be responsible for if you're soloing on the mallet instruments. But, a lot of players do it now, so it's definitely, can be done. Okay.
Beautiful. Okay, next is Curtis. Curtis Halbrook.
Hello. My question's pretty simple, but just like when you were our age, and most of us are like somewhere in between high school and end of college, or those who went back to college and whatnot, when was the point when you kind of realized that like you were like gonna make a huge difference in the percussion world in this ever developing a new world that we live in? Because percussion really isn't that old, and we realized that. But like, did you ever see yourself making that huge of an impact, or was it just kind of by chance?
I didn't. My goal when I started at Berkeley was to someday, if I was lucky, get to be on a record. That happened really quickly. Not only was I on some records, but I had my own contract and was at 17 and was already, it kind of threw me off. I didn't see myself as necessarily a pioneer of either the music or the instrument. I just was hoping I could join the club of musicians and get to play with these good players and all the fun that would include. I didn't see it. The idea that I'd someday be a leader didn't occur to me until, I guess, around the time I was in the middle of the 3 years I was touring with Stan Getz. But up to that point, although I'd led student groups sometimes while I was at Berkeley, but I didn't imagine that I would ever have my own band, so to speak, on the professional level. I thought I was lucky to be in somebody else's band. But then after Stan Getz's group, that was my chance to start my own. But in my case, it happened fairly soon. I didn't realize that I would be a kind of a pioneer in the percussion world at first, even though I knew that my four-mallet playing set me apart. But like I mentioned earlier, I mostly got criticized for that, while I was developing it. And wasn't until I think with the Stan Getz group, because with Shearing, I didn't play with four-mallets much because he already had piano, guitar, vibes, bass, and drums. There wasn't much room for me to comp or play chords. But with Stan, it was the opposite. I was the only chord instrument. And I got that job because he couldn't find a piano player. He was desperately calling piano players because he had some tour dates coming up and his previous guy had left the band. And he talked to a piano player in Los Angeles, one of his old friends who was in fact accompanying Peggy Lee, a singer in those days. Lou Levy was his name. Anyway, and he said, well, there's this vibes player has been playing around here and was with Shearing who plays with four mallets. Maybe that would work instead of a piano. So I got the call and my audition didn't go well. He didn't like it at all. And so that was, I sat in with his then band for an evening at a club, but it's, I didn't know the arrangements or the tunes that they were playing, and I wasn't able to really do much, and he didn't think the sound and everything, it would work. But by the time the next tour started 2 weeks later, I got a call from the bass player, because Stan was too embarrassed to call me, to say they were desperate and would I work the next 3 weeks with them in Canada till they were able to find a piano player. And that's not much of a welcome, but I had nothing else on my schedule. I had just left Shearing's band and was back in New York in January, freezing in the snow. So I said, sure, I'll go to Canada where it's even colder, but it was gigs. And by the end of the 3 weeks, we had really kind of found a way of playing together. And then I ended up staying 3 years, as it turned out. So now, have I gotten off the question here? What was it?
I think you got it. Yeah, just talking about your impact in the percussion world and jazz. Yeah.
It was the Four-mallet thing. Eventually, I realized I was kind of starting something new with that. And eventually, even in New York, when I lived there for 10 years, local student percussionists would look me up and ask for lessons because they were interested in Four-mallet technique and so on. And so that also kind of said to me, oh, okay, I've got something going on here. And but still, to the extent that I've now become this kind of major figure in it, I was never a goal. I just wanted to play the best I could and with the best people I could qualify to play with. That was always the goal.
Awesome, thank you.
Great. And Ethan Miller is next.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Ethan. My question was, how do you deal with pre-performance nerves? And also, I just came up with this other question like earlier during the interview. You said in your interview with Adam 10 that you knew like Claire Musser personally, or at least like he followed your career.
I did,
and
yes.
Like, exchanged letters. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, well, I'll start with Claire and then I'll come back to stage fright after that. I knew Claire, I met him first when I was 9 years old. And my old teacher had gotten in touch with my parents. We had moved already to the little farm town, but they called up my parents and said, there's going to be a marimba convention in Illinois, and you should bring Gary and come to it. So we did. We went. With my grandfather came along, in fact, on the trip, and Clara Musser had organized it and was in charge of it, and it was kind of a competition. They were handing out trophies to different age groups and things, and I was 9 at the time, and I won the junior division. And I have, still to this day, I still have it. It's here in my living room somewhere. I have this little brass cup that was my, first place marimba camp sort of thing. And then I further got to know him later on. He had retired from the mallet life. He was quite a character. He started his career working at Deegan, a rival company. And the story is that he got fired from Deegan because he was having an affair with Deegan's wife. So he left Deegan for whatever reason, but that supposedly was the reason, and started his own company, taking with him the tuner and the plant manager from Deegan to start his new operation. So Musser was born around the later 40s. And I started playing, taking lessons in 1949. So Musser was a fairly still new brand at that time. And Musser's thing was he would go to events and conventions and corporate events to promote the marimba and the mallet instruments, because he played himself and was kind of a, celebrity figure in a way. And, but he sold the company in around the early 60s or the beginning of the 60s to the Ludwig Drum Company, and moved to California and became kind of an inventor. He invented some toys for Mattel. He was always tinkering with things. He had called me up, didn't call me, he wrote me once. He had this idea that he was going to make a mallet instrument out of rocks from meteors, that he was collecting and then shaping them to tune to different pitches. So when you hit them, they would be metallic, but it was going to be the meteor phone or something, I guess. And he would send me something every now and then. The last thing I got was a cartoon of, I wonder if I saved that. There was a cartoon of a duck that it was having something funny, a newspaper cartoon, and he wrote a little note on it. And I said, well, I wonder what the point is here, what he's trying to say to me. But we stayed in touch, casually like that until he passed away. But he was certainly an important figure for mallet instruments. The first few decades were a touch and go as to whether mallet instruments were going to, get established or not, particularly the vibraphone. The marimba was around and would be forever. That's, more natural. But the vibraphone, was invented not by musicians, but by designers in a music factory that thought, hey, a metal xylophone, let's try that. And then some bright person, I always wondered who it was, got the idea, hey, let's put little fans in the resonator pipe and a motor and make it go wah, 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 wah. And I thought, who thought of that? When I got my first vibraphones, I used the motor because it came with, I paid for it. I mean, it was part of the instrument. Everybody I knew who played the vibraphone used the motor. So that was part of what I thought was sort of necessary. But then I joined George Shearing, and he didn't like the vibrato effect, which actually is a tremolo. So it asked me to turn it off for the year that I toured with him. And I got used to not having the fluttering going on. And so when I continued on, I just left it off and never used the vibrato again. But that's the history of Claire Musser. What was the other part of the question that you actually asked? Oh, stage fright. You want a certain amount of tension. And in fact, every performer I know during the period in the dressing room before the concert starts has a routine that they go through, whether it's exercising, washing their hands, but they always do this sort of routine before they are ready to go perform. We get keyed up, and that helps the performance be better than just strolling out leisurely and saying, well, I guess I'll play a little bit now. You build up some excitement, but you can't go over the line into panic. That's the thing. You learn over time how to get up to that line and get just the right amount of energy and excitement going on without, it turning against you. For most players, once they get going, once the concert started, any worries about it go away. It's just until you lose yourself in the music, and then it's fine. If you are fortunate enough to start performing when you're a child, which I did with my family, then you don't get stage fright. You're too young to realize there's anything to get worried about. You're just playing and having fun and so on. And so as you become an adult player, you're already comfortable playing in front of audiences. Every musician I know who started when they were 5 years old or 3 or 7 or whatever, always will say, no, I've never had stage fright. I've never, experienced that at all. And it's because many of us started when we were children and, already bypassed that. classical players have more of a problem with it than jazz players. Because after all, we make lots of mistakes when we're improvising, and you learn how to correct most of them invisibly. But even if it's a real obvious clam, you keep on going and people forget about it. On the other hand, if you're playing a very familiar classical piece and musicians in the audience will know it by heart, and you stray off and hit something wrong or leave a section out or whatever, people are going to know. And so every time I've had to do classical projects, it makes me more nervous than any other performance situation, because I know I'm expected to play it perfectly. But on the other hand, I'm a jazzer, so they're forgiving if I miss something now and then. So I don't get too worried about it, but I try to do it right. But it always convinces me not to keep taking these classical projects. You know, I've done several concertos that people have written for me and so on. And every time afterwards, I always say, do not do this again. It's, you know, too much work goes into it, and, you know, it's not as fun as your regular playing. So, but yet it's easy to get sucked into, ooh, this is a really good writer. And this sounds, yeah, the New York Lincoln Center, ooh, okay, I'll do it. And then you end up killing yourself learning this piece and getting through it. So I don't have a magic answer to stage fright or getting nervous, except that, you know, you'll get over it. The more you can play in front of people, the better. So school concerts, any kind of playing. I played all through high school and my 2 years in college. I played in nightclubs constantly. And I played 5 nights a week the 2 years I was in Boston, going to Berkeley, at a club called the 123 Lounge, because that was the address of the club, 123 something or other, and to pay my living expenses. And you know, if you've done that enough for enough nights, you know, you get way past worrying about what people are likely to think and so on. So keep playing.
That's a great advice. Great advice, Ethan. We always say here that you don't learn to perform in the practice room. We've got to be on the stage.
Yeah. Well, that's schools are one of the advantages of schools is there's lots of performing opportunities, concerts and different settings and so on, to help you kind of break the ice and get used to doing that. Otherwise, you know, the more you can do it when you're younger, you know, and you're forgiven for, you know, making mistakes when you're 13 or 15 or whatever. So that's when to do it.
Awesome. Okay, next. Gary, I think we're in our lightning round here. We've got about four more questions for you. This is Christian. Christian, are you there?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I am. Hello, my name is Christian. I was just curious, earlier you were talking a little bit how you developed your own style. I imagine that when you were developing your grip or your style, you know, you looked for different opportunities to, like, you know, I'm going to do this so I can play a larger interval. Were you looking into that when you were trying to develop your own, I guess, style?
Well, here's what happened. I first played the vibraphone with 2 mallets, jazz. I had played with 4 some written music that you could buy, sheet music that was written for 4 mallets. Things by George Hamilton Green primarily. One of them I remember because it was called 4-Stick Joe, but it was kind of a novelty piece that involved 4 mallets. But when it came to improvising, I couldn't hold 4 mallets and comfortably maneuver, you know, the soloing. And I'd have to lay down 2 mallets when it came time to solo. And then I could go back to 4 when I would comp for other people. And that began to frustrate me because in the middle of soloing, I would get an instinct to lay down a chord occasionally, and I wouldn't have 4 mallets to do it with. So the summer of my junior year, between junior and senior year, I was home for the summer. I had my instruments out on the screened in porch in the back of the house. And I said, okay, I'm going to figure out this mallet problem, because I want to hold the four mallets while I'm soloing, but it's too clumsy. It took me about a month of experimenting, holding in different positions, different fingerings, different, whatever, until I came up with what is now my grip. And then I continued using it from then on, and it was easy to solo with the two upper mallets in each hand. So I could play two note passages just, almost as if the other two mallets had disappeared. And then I could also play chords whenever I felt like it. So it wasn't a real lengthy process. I said, I need to do something to fix this, because it's holding me back from what I want to play. And I'm going to just figure this out. And I had plenty of time on my hands. So within a few weeks, came up with it and continued playing with it. And it quickly became very natural to me, and so on. So that's the story. It was a short process based on need.
Great. And next is Joni Adams.
Hi, I'm Joni. My question was, do you have any tips for learning tunes or music quicker? Like if you're in a performance setting and you're not familiar with a tune, like how would you go about that?
Well, I don't think I have a suggestion for how to learn things quicker. Certainly, as you get more experience with tunes, you get quicker at being able to, psych out a piece quickly. I mean, eventually, if you're doing, typical studio work, you're sight reading. You don't see the music before you get to the session, and they put it in front of you, and you're expected to, be able to play it within the next run, within a run through or two. And so my preferred way of learning new songs is to sit down at the piano and play them, as I've described earlier, play them very simply, repetitively, and listen to them and get to really understand how it's put together, how the harmonies move, and so on. So I'm not, just kind of guessing at things. But over the years, at this point, there's very little that I, couldn't sight read on the spot, except really complex things that Chick Corea would write. And then we would both have to practice them together for half an hour before we could, more or less run through them properly. But standard tunes, that sort of thing, they were easy reading for me. So it's just a matter of the more you do it, the easier and faster it gets. I did have a wonderful piece of good luck in that there was a teacher in Boston who was a classical pianist who taught ear training at Berkeley. And I had perfect pitch, so the ear training was kind of a waste for me. And he suggested that I come over to his studio, and he would show me some ways to practice sight reading. I thought, wow, okay. And he had a book on sight reading that had been written by two members of the Boston Symphony. I have no idea what the name of it is now, but it was popular back in the day. And they were all very difficult exercises for you to sight read and learn. But instead of playing it, this was genius on his part, he had me conduct the time signature and sing the notes. And he said, I don't care if you hit the right notes or not, but if you get the rhythms right, and take a stab at the notes, but mostly get the rhythms right, but do it while you're conducting. And it was often in different time signatures. It would shift time signatures from, a bar of 5/4, and then a bar of 5/8, and then 4/4, and for 3 bars, and so on. It was a real challenge to learn these examples, but I can tell you, I became a sight reading demon by the time I left Berkeley. And to my delight, discovered that vibraphone players were well known for being hardly able to read because there were never vibraphone parts, you know, generally. And so we usually would read off the piano part or the guitar part or something, or make up our own part. So I remember Shearing saying that, well, you know, most device players don't seem to know much about reading. Of course, that's true about a lot of guitar players also, who are kind of have a reputation of being weak on sight reading. So when you find one who can really read like a demon, they're a rare talent. Well, that's my best advice, which is there's no quick solution. Keep learning new tunes, and the more you learn, the quicker you'll get at it.
Awesome.
Next, Mark.
Yeah, Jake Grimsley.
Hi, Mr. Burton.
Hi.
So throughout your teaching career, what have you found to be the most difficult concept, or one of the most difficult concepts for students to grasp? And then what advice would you give to new educators who might deal with the same issue?
Well, the most difficult concept to absorb as a student and also to explain to the students is time feel. You can explain the notes, the harmonies pretty easily, but getting time feel, that's another mystical thing. Now, some people, I've noticed, some students almost immediately are naturals at this. They can keep a steady tempo. They have the right interpretation of swing, syncopated time, and so on. And I say, well, lucky you. You know, the 1 out of 10 students who had that going, you know, had a leg up on the rest of us. Otherwise, you have to train yourself. For instance, my advice would be, first of all, do a lot of practicing with a metronome. What we tend to do is, if we all can keep steady time if we're just clapping our hands. But once you start making up melodies and soloing and everything, you know, your brain doesn't have a time to keep track of the time. So we have to train the brain to keep track of the time in the background, so that even when you're playing complicated things, there's this ingrained sense of, you know, steady time that, you know, you can use while you're playing. So one way to help develop that is, I tell you what I was guilty of, and a lot of players, is that as I would get more excited in my soloing and building a solo, I would speed up, I would get faster. And what I would do, I wouldn't get ahead of the band, but my phrase would rush. And then I would pause when it was time to take a breath and start again in the right place, but I would get ahead, keep getting ahead. So it sounded like I was rushing. Common thing with a lot of student players. So the metronome helped me, practicing with the metronome helped me develop a steady time sense. Another thing that I got a lot of use from and recommended to people was get a pair of brushes, like the drummers use, and put on a record with a very solid, steady groove. Pick a jazz record that you know has a great time feel, and then just sit there and use the brushes and play time on a cardboard box. We used to do it on record covers that were 12 inches by 12 inches, but we don't have many of those anymore. But people these days use a piece of cardboard. But you can, you know, it's like it's the head of a snare drum, and just play time. And it'll amaze you how hard it is to play for 7 or 8 minutes and not get off, at least occasionally. We think, you know, sure, this is not hard. I can play 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, steady time. And the next thing you know, 2 choruses later, I'm sped up a little, or I slowed down a little, or I goofed a little bit. And I realized, wow, the drummer, he has to keep that going absolutely flawlessly up for the whole tune. So that also helped me develop a steady time sense. And then listening back to your playing is a marvelous thing. It was hard to do in my day because, we didn't have digital everything. My father bought me a tape recorder finally at one point in high school. It was about, huge, weighed 60 pounds and thing, but it was a reel-to-reel tape recorder. And I could record myself comping on piano with a metronome to keep me steady. And I would record about 10 choruses of a standard song. And then I could play the vibes with this, track that I had made. And then I would listen back to myself. I would take the thing with me to the club I was playing and record some of my solos during the gig and come back home and listen to them the next day. It's a demoralizing experience, I have to tell you, to listen to your early soloing back. You think, well, I should give up now. Because you hear all the things, they've got real tense here. I missed some notes there. I'm out of the tempo here and so on. But your brain learns a lot from hearing your playing back. Short anecdote, if we've got time, barely. I grew up with knowing a family that had a deaf daughter, and she had injured her ears somehow with some kind of explosion and had no hearing, went to deaf school, became an adult and so on. And at some point, unexpectedly, got her hearing back, suddenly was there. And she didn't know how to speak. So they hired a speech therapist who brought a tape recorder and would practice with Nancy as on speaking. And the speech therapist said, it used to take 2 years to teach a deaf person, who newly could hear, to speak normally. With the tape recorder, it takes 6 months. The brain being able to, learn from hearing itself back. And it's true with music, I think. You hear yourself playing and your brain, you're listening to it consciously, but your unconscious part of the brain is also making note of what's going on and adjusting and learning from the experience. Okay. Anything else, Mark?
That's a great story. Yeah, we've got one more student question, and we can go over a little bit as long as you're okay, Gary. So it's completely
not a problem.
Alisa Teach Out has a question for you. That was earlier in our list.
Yeah, I was wondering if you have any horror stories you'd like to share from performing, like maybe you were sick or something less than ideal, and kind of how did you get through it?
That was an interesting question when I saw it here. The truth is, like in most performance art, the show must go on is the rule. So if you're able to stand, you go ahead and play. Now, doesn't work if you're a singer and you're got a serious cold or the flu or something. But if in case of most musicians, if you're able to move around and even though you feel like crap, you can, you do the gig. And I have to tell you that sometimes some of those gigs were among my best performances. You forget about your head stuffed up and feeling queasy, once you get into the music and it, surprises you. In fact, one anecdote, Chick Corea and I did kind of a foolish thing. We accepted a tour offer in Europe of 21 concerts without a day off. It kept filling in and we kept saying, well, yeah, okay, add that one too. And next thing you know, we had actually every 21 days in a row. We started in Turkey and then crisscrossed Europe, for 3 weeks. So naturally by midway, we both had serious colds and were exhausted and, it was challenging. And the final night was a jazz festival in Zurich, Switzerland. We didn't go on until midnight and we were quite exhausted and we had, runny noses and there were no tissues no Kleenex in the dressing room or backstage. We came out to play finally. Chick actually brought the roll of toilet paper and sat it on the piano. And between, tunes, he would blow his nose. And we were recording that night. The record company had come over with the remote equipment from Munich and with the engineer and everything, and was recording it. So you can hear, in fact, Chick snuffling during quiet parts on the recording. We did a double album of that concert, and that was 1980. It was when we heard the tapes back, it was terrific. It won a Grammy, and and I still think it may be the best of all the duet records we made. But we were both sick as dogs when we had to play that concert. So I've missed a few gigs where I just couldn't get up. I was too sick to function, but only maybe 2 or 3 in my 57 years of professional touring. Most of the time we made it. I'm sure, Mark, you've played with, being half sick.
Oh man, yes. Those are not good nights. You just as you said, you just put your head down and focus on the music, and that's what it is.
Surprisingly, I would come off afterwards and say, wow, that was maybe the best gig this week. And yet I felt like I was going to pass out midway.
Wow.
Okay. Well,
Gary, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I have just 2 really quick questions for you. You can.
Okay.
When I was a kid, I heard you play on one of the recordings, which is escaping me, which tune I'm thinking of you bending the note on the vibraphone. And then at that time, of course, I know now how it's happening, but at that time, I had no idea. And I was like, how are you doing that? And I was curious about Emil Richards. Did Emil come up with that first, or did you show him?
No, Emil showed it to me. Now, I don't know if he discovered it or someone else showed it to him, but he showed it to me using a cigarette lighter on the bar. And it wasn't something you couldn't walk around on the stage with a cigarette lighter, in the middle of a tune. But I loved the idea of being able to use this, little extra, variation. And I got the idea to use a hard xylophone mallet instead of the cigarette lighter. So I put that on the bottom of my 4 mallets, and then I played with 3. And then when I wanted to bend a note, I would bring in the plastic mallet. And I used that as an effect for, 3 or 4 years. And I eventually gave it up when I was in the middle of a Europe tour, and I broke my xylophone mallet. I was pressing down to make the bending effect, and it broke this rattan handle. And I said, okay, well, I'll finish the tour without it. And then I didn't miss it that much. And I realized that the audiences always looked at it as some kind of a weird gimmick. They said, well, what's he doing up there? How's that work? What? Can you see how he's doing that? It was, I wanted to become just part of playing the vibraphone. But even after several years of doing this, it was still like a novelty thing. And so that kind of turned me off as well. So I said, well, okay, I'll chalk that up to an experiment. And I must have made at least 2 or 3, 4 records during that period of time where I used it occasionally on some songs.
Sure. It was always effective in the recordings, I thought.
Yeah, well, that was easier. But I only used it on certain tunes in the live performance as well, the ones that lent themselves to this bluesy, moody kind of situation.
Sure. Wow. And then one last thing just for the students, because they probably know it. They've read your bios and things. But Gary, you came back to Berkeley and led that school as the dean. What was your title there? Was the chair?
I was there 33 years. First decade, I was just a professor. The second decade, I was the dean of curriculum. We had 4 deans. There was the dean of faculty, the dean of students, and so on. And I was in charge of we had 600 courses at that time in the catalog. And incredible. I had to keep updating them and updating the author for the accreditation reviews that would happen every 10 years and so on. And I was also responsible for the library and lots of special events things and so on. Then I became, in the last decade, I became the executive vice president and took over running the school, the day-to-day operations. Well, so the president, who at that time had been president for like 20 years already, and he wanted to concentrate on fundraising, which was fine with me because that was the least of my interest. So he would go off, on those kind of dinners and meetings and things, and then I would essentially run the school. And I was surprised that I did it. At first I told him, I said, I can't imagine this working out. So I'll try it for a year, and then that'll give us time to do a search for someone else. And but by the end of the year, I was kind of into it, and it seemed to be working. So I went on ahead until I retired, essentially. In fact, the president and I retired together. We were the same age. And when he decided that he was ready to, hang it up and move to Arizona, which he did, that I said, well, I'm going to retire also because I don't want to be president and take over the fundraising responsibility. And it's better that a new president should choose his own, people and so on. In fact, the new president has been a huge success. He's been there 17 years now, and he's just retired. And we have a new president starting this summer.
Incredible. So was there a moment when you realized how much you loved to teach as well and work with the students?
It was a surprise to me when I was younger and starting my career. Teaching didn't appeal to me at all. I was focused on my own musical problems and challenges. And the last thing I wanted to do was spend a lot of time helping somebody else with their problems, their challenges. But I started doing clinics, which was a new thing at the time. This was in the early 60s and mid 60s. First it was just, they would send you to a music store where they'd set up folding chairs and you would do a little presentation and try to promote the Musser instruments. And then schools got into it and would bring you to the college or the high school and so on. So it became, for many jazz musicians like me, kind of a second source of income. In between tour dates, I could book, a weekend of clinics that hit 2 or 3 colleges in a part of the country and put on some clinics, play with the local the college jazz band and so on.
Sure.
Increasingly, I realized that this was something I seemed to have a knack for, explaining things. A lot of musicians are not good verbally. You ask them, well, how does that work? How do you think about that? And they would say, I just hear it, which doesn't help you at all. It's not always easy to understand and explain how we do some of these intuitive things. But I found I sort of had a knack for this. And I was in New York. A recession, I was leading a band by that time. This was the early 70s. I'd had a band for about 5 years, and a recession hit. And suddenly a good portion of my bookings canceled. Clubs closed, concerts were scaled down, festivals were, downsized and so on. So I found I had to, I was worried. I'd just gotten married and bought a house and so on. So I was worried about keeping up with expenses. And so I thought, maybe I should, see if I can teach at Berkeley. And maybe I need to do it for a few years or something just to make sure I get through this period before things get desperate. And they were happy to have me come. So I moved up to Boston and started teaching. And, within a few years, the gigs were back, which was fine, but I was also really enjoying the teaching. And both seemed to complement each other so nicely that I said, well, I'll keep on going. and I'll keep on another year. And so pretty soon it was obvious that I was, kind of hooked on both experiences. And I learned also that teaching was very beneficial to my music, to my playing. I would learn stuff from the students, even when they would make mistakes. And I'd say, I would never have thought of hitting that note in that spot, but it had an interesting effect. That new train of thought here, like that kind of works, and so on. And the students were always asking provocative questions about how does that work? And then by the time I thought it out, I would say, I never thought about that before, but I'm glad to understand it better. So I'm sure you've had the same experiences with teaching.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
All teachers say this.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, it's great to hear you talk about it. And it's great for you to spend time with us today, Gary, and share all your experiences. It's always such an inspiration for me to hear you play, of course, and hear you talk about your experiences in music. And I know that you've touched the students here as well, and all the faculty as well listening. So thank you so much. Wow.
Sure.
It's a blessing.
Happy to be here today. Good luck to all of you.
Thank you so much.
Happy music making.
Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Okay.
See you. So the rest of you guys will be back at 3:30. All right, and we'll get back to it. That was amazing. That was absolutely incredible. We'll talk more about it. Take a break. I'll see you at 3:30. Okay, Central Time.